Deep in the emerald maze of the Florida Everglades, a predator older than the dinosaurs was waiting silent, patient, and unstoppable. What happens when one of America's most experienced wildlife guides crosses paths with a killer that knows no fear? In a matter of moments, a dream eco-tour turns into a nightmare of teeth, blood, and helpless screams. Stay with us as we reveal the shocking true story that exposed a deadly secret in one of the nation's most famous national parks. Welcome to True Animal Terrors, where real danger meets real stories. Don't look away. The shout came like a gunshot in the heavy, wet air of the Florida Everglades. Get back! Get back! Dave's voice cracked with panic, slicing through the low hum of insects and the growl of the tourboat's engine. At first, no one moved. The late afternoon sun shimmered on the water, turning it gold until that gold flashed crimson. Beneath the ripples, something immense surged upward, and in an instant, jaws the size of a truck's grill clamped down on Dave's leg with the bone-crushing force of a hydraulic press. For one breathless moment, 20 tourists sat frozen, some with phones still held high, recording what they thought was another thrilling Everglades moment staged by the fearless guide. Then came the scream. Raw, unmistakable, terrifying. Cut the engine. Cut it now. Captain Morrison's weathered hands shook as he fumbled for the emergency shutoff. Only minutes earlier, Dave had been laughing, telling stories about gentle giants. Now those words mocked the scene unfolding. From the dark depths, a saltwater crocodile, one of the largest in North America, had surfaced. The locals called him Big Rex. Over a ton of prehistoric muscle and malice, Rex held Dave in a death grip. Parents clutched their children. Others stared in mute horror, phones still rolling. The swamp's chorus of frogs and birds was drowned out by shouts, sobs, and the slap of water. Dave surfaced once, gasping, blood coursing down his cheek, eyes wide with the primal understanding that he wasn't getting out alive. Please! His voice was barely audible over the chaos. Please, help me! Then Big Rex rolled, dragging him under. The water stilled, the ripples flattened, and Dave Carlson, veteran guide, father of two men who'd wrestled gators and saved strangers, was gone. It had taken less than 4 minutes for a family-friendly eco-tour to become a nightmare etched into every witness's mind. In the days that followed, questions would swirl. Why had years of warnings gone unheeded? Why had safety protocols been ignored? And how could a man who had devoted his life to understanding wild predators be swallowed by the very trust he'd built with them? Because Dave Carlson wasn't just any tour guide. For 18 years, he'd been the Everglades' living legend, a man who could read the water like a book and knew every bird call in the river of grass. As a boy, he'd grown up in its shadow, the son of a Seminole mother and an Irish fisherman father, learning the swamp's secrets before he could drive a boat. By 15, he could track a panther in the dark. By 20, he was a junior guide. By 35, he owned the most popular eco-tour company in South Florida. He was fearless, sometimes recklessly so. He'd fed wild gators by hand, swum in crocodile territory, and ventured into places other guides called suicide runs. He'd been bitten 17 times, struck by lightning twice, and once survived 3 days stranded deep in the swamp when his motor failed. Through it all, his love for the wilderness only grew. The swamp doesn't want to hurt you, he would tell nervous tourists as 10-foot gators drifted by. It just wants to be understood. Respect it, and it'll take care of you. For nearly 20 years, Dave Carlson's simple creed had kept him alive in the wildest corners of the Everglades. Respect the swamp, and the swamp will respect you. It wasn't a slogan for tourists, it was how he lived. And for 2 decades, it had worked. He'd never lost a tourist, never had a serious incident, never faced an animal he couldn't outthink or outmaneuver. But that confidence, built on countless safe returns, hit a dangerous blind spot. Dave had spent so much of his life around American alligators that he'd come to believe he understood all crocodilians. In his mind, they were variations on a theme, different sizes, maybe different colors, but the same instincts. That belief would cost him everything. When Everglades National Park quietly began introducing a handful of saltwater crocodiles as part of a controversial restoration project, Dave saw nothing to fear. To him, they were simply bigger, more spectacular versions of his old gator friends. Salties, he told guests, are just the alligator's show-off cousin. He couldn't have been more wrong. One of those new arrivals, known to locals as Big Rex, was unlike anything Florida had ever seen. Brought in from Australia 18 months earlier under a hush-hush scientific program, Rex measured nearly 20 feet from snout to tail and weighed well over a ton. He was one of the largest saltwater crocodiles ever relocated to North America, a living relic of prehistoric design. Unlike the relatively docile American alligators Dave knew so well, saltwater crocodiles are apex predators, hardwired by millions of years of evolution to treat anything in their territory as potential prey. The warnings came fast and loud. Marine biologists urged extreme caution. Park rangers advised keeping at least 500 yards from known croc zones. Even the Australian handlers who had transported Rex insisted that saltwater crocs were different, more aggressive, more territorial, more prone to attack without provocation. Dave dismissed them all. "I've been working with crocs for 20 years, he'd say, using the local term for alligators. A crocodile is a crocodile. When park officials suggested altering his routes to avoid areas where Rex had been sighted, Dave refused. Those channels were among the best wildlife viewing spots in the entire Everglades, and he wasn't about to let bureaucratic nonsense spoil the experience for his paying guests. That stubborn choice would lead him on the morning of August 15th straight into the heart of Big Rex's territory, a place where experience and reputation meant nothing. Big Rex was no ordinary predator. Born in the crocodile-infested rivers of Australia's Northern Territory, he had spent 15 years ruling his stretch of water with unchallenged dominance. At nearly 20 feet long, with jaws capable of snapping a water buffalo's spine, Rex had never known defeat, never known fear, and never tolerated rivals. Relocating him to Florida had been an act of desperation. The Everglades ecosystem was buckling under invasive species. Burmese pythons strangling the swamps, lionfish stripping reefs, bare feral hogs rooting through fragile wetlands. Conventional control methods had failed. So in a decision kept largely secret from the public, the National Park Service partnered with Australian wildlife authorities to release a small population of saltwater crocodiles, betting on their legendary appetites to help restore balance. Rex was chosen precisely because of his size and ferocity. Australian handlers called him the most territorial male we've ever worked with, a crocodile that had killed 3 other large males to claim his domain. Capturing him had taken 8 men nearly 6 hours armed with specialized gear. Even sedated Rex destroyed 2 steel transport cages and badly injured a handler. He was supposed to be released deep in a remote section of the park far from tourist routes with heavy monitoring and clear warning systems in place. But budget cuts gutted ranger patrols and safety oversight. Within weeks, Rex's new territory overlapped directly with popular tour paths. The first signs of trouble were impossible to ignore. Wildlife began vanishing at an alarming rate. Rangers found the torn remains of a 12-foot alligator ripped clean in half. A manatee family disappeared overnight. Most unsettling of all, Rex began exhibiting a behavior even veteran croc experts found chilling. He started hunting the boats. American alligators usually avoid humans steering clear of noisy craft. Saltwater crocodiles, on the other hand, are opportunistic killers with no built-in fear of people. Rex quickly learned the tour schedules, positioning himself along popular routes. Rangers spotted him shadowing boats for miles, staying just out of sight, watching, waiting, memorizing patterns. Informal warnings trickled to the guides, but nothing official. The Park Service feared public backlash if word got out about their experiment. Guides like Dave were told to exercise caution in certain zones without being told exactly why. Dave first encountered Rex 3 weeks before the attack. It was late in the day, the low sun burning the water copper and gold, when the giant surfaced alongside his airboat close enough for him to touch. For a heartbeat predator and man locked eyes across the dark water. "Would you look at the size of this beauty," Dave told his wide-eyed guests, reaching for his camera. "This is what we call a really big boy." What Dave read as curiosity was, in fact, reconnaissance. Rex was memorizing the boat's dimensions, gauging speed, noting where the passengers sat. His mind, honed by 200 million years of predatory evolution, was running attack scenarios. Rex followed the airboat for over a mile that evening, sometimes gliding just beneath the surface, sometimes breaking it in slow, ominous rises. When Dave finally opened the throttle to pull away, Rex didn't retreat. He accelerated, matching the boat's speed for nearly a quarter mile before melting into the mangrove maze. That night, Dave phoned his wife, Sarah, more exhilarated than concerned. "Honey, I saw the most incredible crocodile today. Must have been 18, maybe 20 feet long. Absolutely magnificent." "Weren't you worried?" she asked. Worried, Dave laughed. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. Do you know how rare it is to see a crocodile that size? The tourists are going to love this. 3 days later, Rex killed and ate a 6-foot alligator less than 50 yards from a popular photo stop for tour boats. Rangers found drag marks and blood, but called it natural predation and filed it away. No warning went out. 2 weeks after that, a fisherman radioed in a terrifying report. The biggest crocodile he had ever seen had rammed his skiff hard enough to crack the hull. He barely made it to shore. The report vanished into park administration, lost in a tangle of paperwork. Dave never heard about either incident. If he had, he might have realized that Rex was not just another crocodile to admire from a distance. Rex was a man-eater, a perfect killing machine, and he had already marked Dave's boats as targets, waiting only for the right moment to strike. On the morning of August 15th, the Everglades awoke under a hard blue sky. The air was heavy, oppressive, shimmering above the water like heat off asphalt. Somewhere deep in the green-black channels of the mangroves, Big Rex lay motionless. His eyes just visible above the surface, watched and waited. Dave arrived at the marina long before the first streaks of sunrise brushed the eastern sky. It was the way he always started his days, alone in the quiet hours before the swamp woke. The air still held the cool trace of night, but heat was already building in the heavy August humidity, clinging to his skin as he walked the weathered dock planks. He moved with the easy rhythm of a man who had done this thousands of times, checking the hull for hairline cracks, running a hand along the airboat's rail, listening to the low metallic hum of the engine as it idled in warm-up. The forecast called for afternoon thunderstorms, a standard summer script in South Florida, but nothing that worried him. Dave had piloted through far worse torrential rains that turned the horizon into a curtain of silver lightning, that lit the sawgrass like strobe lights, winds that whipped the channels into frothing whitecaps. Today would be fine. By the time the first guests arrived, the horizon was glowing pale gold, the sun lifting into a sky streaked with thin clouds. The group was typical for peak tourist season 22, paying customers each with their own reasons for being there. A young couple on their honeymoon clung to each other, smiling at everything. A family wrangled 3 restless children who darted up and down the dock. A few elderly retirees carried cameras worth more than Dave's first boat lenses, gleaming in the early light. They had all paid premium prices for Dave's ultimate Everglades experience, a 4-hour journey promising close encounters with alligators, manatees, and rare birds in untouched wilderness. Dave gathered them around his posture, loose, his grin easy. His voice carried just enough authority to keep their attention as he gave the safety briefing. Stay seated while we're moving. Keep hands and feet inside the rails. And if we see something aggressive, we give it space. The most important thing to remember, he said, eyes sweeping the group, is that we're visitors in their home. We watch, we photograph, we respect, and we don't do anything stupid. The line drew chuckles. The irony would not be lost later. At 9:15 a.m., Dave fired up the airboat's engine. The huge fan roared to life, scattering a few startled egrets from the reeds. Captain Morrison, silent but alert, manned the controls as Dave took his spot at the bow, ready to narrate the day's adventure. They slipped into the labyrinth of channels, narrow waterways threading through a kingdom of green, and for the first 2 hours it was perfect. They spotted sunbathing alligators draped over muddy banks like living relics. A family of manatees rolled lazily in a crystal-clear spring, their broad backs catching the sunlight. Wading birds stalked the shallows, stabbing at fish with surgical precision. Cameras clicked endlessly, the air full of excited whispers. Dave was in his element, spinning stories of the swamp's history, pointing out subtle signs of wildlife, positioning the boat so his guests could capture perfect shots. By 11:30 a.m., the tour could have ended, and everyone would have left happy. But Dave wanted more for them. He wanted memorable. Against the caution that sometimes tugged at him, he decided to take them to the Honey Hole, a hidden lagoon deep in the park where wildlife gathered in abundance. It was the ace up his sleeve, the place he saved for special occasions. He didn't know that Big Rex had claimed it. The lagoon was glassy when they arrived, so clear that the guests could see schools of fish 20 feet below. Dave cut the engine, letting the boat drift. This, he whispered, is why I do this job. Places like this, untouched by civilization, where nature still rules. For over an hour, Rex had been tracking them, shadowing their path through his territory with the patience of a predator that had never known hunger. He wasn't like the alligators. Dave was used to sunbathers, content to announce themselves. Rex was a phantom moving with deceptive grace for his size. The first warning came not from sight, but from absence. The lagoon, usually alive with the calls of herons, egrets, and ibises, was unnervingly silent. Even the insect hum seemed muted. Dave noticed but brushed it off. Wildlife came and went. Some days were quiet. At 11:47 a.m., he spotted an alligator on a fallen log 30 feet away and decided to give his guests a thrill. He started the engine, easing toward it for a better look. The gator was nothing more than bait for human eyes. From directly beneath them, Big Rex struck. He erupted from the dark water with the speed of a torpedo, his 4-foot-long head crashing into the side of the airboat. The impact, over 200 pounds of skull and muscle, lifted part of the hull clear of the surface. Dave, leaning over the rail to point out the log gator, was launched into the lagoon, landing inches from the real predator's snapping jaws. For a second, no one moved. The tourists sat frozen, their brains rejecting what they had just seen. Then panic hit like a wave. Children screamed. Adults shouted conflicting orders. Phones and cameras splashed into the water as people backed away from the railings. Dave broke the surface, gasping, blood streaming from deep cuts where Rex's initial strike had grazed him. The crocodile had missed his killing bite, but only just. Now Rex circled his bulk, churning the water, his eyes fixed on the flailing man. "Throw me the rope," Dave shouted. But the passengers were locked in fear, their movements jerky, uncertain. Morrison scrambled for the emergency gear, but the engine had stalled. The radio was dead, and Rex was closing in. At 11:48 a.m., the circling stopped. Rex slid into position, perfectly in line with the man struggling toward the boat. Then he struck from behind, exactly as his instincts dictated. One moment, Dave was swimming, telling his guests it would be all right. The next, jaws clamped around his leg with over 3,700 pounds of pressure per square inch. The sound was sickening, a wet, grinding crunch that no one aboard would ever forget. Blood billowed in a crimson cloud as Rex began the death roll, twisting violently, snapping bones and tearing flesh. Dave was dragged under. Pain, pressure, and spinning darkness consumed him. His last coherent thought was a plea that someone tell Sarah and the kids that he loved them. Above the surface, 22 people stared at the widening circle of red, the ripples fading until the lagoon was still again. Big Rex had claimed his prize, and there was nothing they could do to stop him. The rescue boats came 43 minutes too late. By the time the first park rangers and emergency responders pushed into the Honey Hole Lagoon, the water's surface was still again eerily still. There was no thrashing, no sign of the predator that had just shattered the calm. Big Rex had melted away into the labyrinth of mangrove-lined channels, taking Dave's body with him. What remained was a slick of blood on the glassy water and a boatload of stunned, trembling witnesses. Some passengers clutched each other and stared at the crimson cloud. Others sat rigid, their hands still gripping camera straps, as if afraid to move. Captain Morrison, pale and drenched in sweat, kept scanning the water, muttering, "He's gone. God, he's gone." The search began immediately, an operation unlike anything the Everglades had ever seen. Over the next 8 days, rangers, Coast Guard crews, and wildlife officers scoured more than 200 square miles of the most unforgiving terrain in North America. Airboats roared down narrow channels, helicopters swept low over the marsh, their rotors beating the humid air into a thunderous drum. Armed rangers patrolled every open waterway, scanning for the faint ripple of a massive reptile's passage. But Rex had chosen his territory well. His lair lay deep in the park's heart, in a network of channels, too narrow for most boats, too choked with roots for divers, and too dangerous for anyone to linger. Even with underwater cameras, the searchers found little more than a submerged forest of fallen logs, hidden caves, and pockets of murky water where a 20-foot crocodile could disappear in plain sight. On the third day, they found the first evidence, a grim discovery that froze every searcher in place. Shredded fabric from Dave's vest, a few scattered bones, pieces of equipment. The location was a hidden grotto, its entrance guarded by a wall of mangrove roots so dense it looked impenetrable. Inside, forensic experts would later determine, was Rex's larder, an underwater cave where crocodiles store their kills until the meat softens. The thought was chilling. Dave had been dragged here alive, locked in that black water as part of a predator's ancient ritual. On August 23rd, after 8 days of searching, Dave Carlson was officially declared dead. The autopsy on the minimal remains retrieved from Rex's lair confirmed what everyone feared: massive trauma consistent with crocodile predation, bones crushed to splinters, deep punctures from teeth, and unmistakable signs of the death roll that had torn him apart. But as devastating as a loss was, Dave's death was just the opening act in a larger tragedy, one that would ignite a firestorm in the scientific community, trigger congressional hearings, and expose a wildlife management scandal of unprecedented scale. Within hours of the attack, leaked documents began surfacing. They confirmed what some locals had whispered for months. The National Park Service had been running a covert saltwater crocodile introduction program. Internal emails showed officials knew about Rex's aggression long before Dave's death. They had ignored repeated warnings, failed to update safety protocols, and kept tour operators in the dark. Worse still, Rex wasn't alone. 6 other saltwater crocodiles, all large males known for their territorial aggression, had been released into the Everglades. The public's reaction was instant and furious. Environmental groups that once supported the program now demanded the removal of every saltwater crocodile. Tour operators filed lawsuits accusing the Park Service of deliberately withholding life-or-death information. Florida's congressional delegation called for immediate investigations, with Senator Maria Rodriguez branding it the most reckless wildlife management decision in American history. In Washington, Dave's widow Sarah became the face of the fight for accountability. At a packed congressional hearing, she sat before lawmakers, her voice steady even as tears slid down her cheeks. "My husband spent 18 years keeping people safe in that swamp," she said. "He knew the difference between an alligator and a crocodile. He tried to warn them 3 times that something dangerous was out there. They ignored him. They told him he was mistaken. And now my children have no father because bureaucrats decided their experiment was more important than human lives." The investigation that followed peeled back layers of negligence and arrogance. Australian wildlife authorities had explicitly warned their American counterparts that the selected crocodiles were the most aggressive they'd ever captured, animals entirely unsuitable for areas with human activity. Those warnings had been buried. Local law enforcement, tour companies, and even many park rangers had been kept in the dark under the guise of operational security, which investigators later concluded was nothing more than an effort to avoid public backlash. 3 months after Dave's death, Big Rex was finally captured in a tense nighttime operation involving 24 specialist floodlights and enough tranquilizer to drop an elephant. When they hauled him out of the water, his size was staggering, just over 21 feet long, weighing nearly 2,400 pounds thicker through the middle than most men were tall. Even sedated Rex fought with such ferocity that seasoned handlers admitted they'd never seen anything like it. When forensic teams opened his stomach, the truth was worse than anyone expected. Inside were the remains of 4 large alligators, several manatees, and human bone fragments, later linked to a missing person whose disappearance 6 months earlier had been written off as a drowning. The capture footage aired on every major network, floodlights gleaming off the armored hide ropes, straining men shouting over the roar of generators. The image burned itself into the public's mind, a prehistoric monster that had thrived in modern America's backyard, unchecked and unstoppable, until it had taken one of their own. The man brought in to face Big Rex was no stranger to danger. An Australian crocodile specialist, with 3 decades of experience handling the world's largest and most dangerous reptiles, he had looked into the eyes of dozens of apex predators. But when the operation ended, he would say without hesitation, "Rex is the most aggressive saltwater crocodile I've ever encountered in 30 years. In the end, Rex was returned to Australia along with the 5 other saltwater crocodiles the search teams had managed to track down and capture. But one was missing, its fate unknown. It had either died, vanished into the deepest reaches of the Everglades, or perhaps adapted so completely to its new home that it remained an unseen shadow. The possibility that a massive unseen predator still lurked somewhere in that sprawling wilderness cast a long, silent shadow over everyone who knew the story. The political and legal shockwaves stretched for years. 3 senior Park Service officials were fired, each facing criminal charges for their role in hiding the risks of the introduction program. In Washington, congressional hearings dragged the scandal into the harshest light, ending in new ironclad regulations. From then on, every wildlife introduction program would require full public disclosure and mandatory safety assessments for all areas with tourist access. The families of those confirmed or suspected to have been killed by the saltwater crocodiles received substantial settlements. Sarah Carlson, though, was unshaken in her stance. No amount of money will bring my husband back. Her words became the moral center of the tragedy. Dave's death also changed something in the national conversation. It became a touchstone moment in how Americans thought about apex predators. Wildlife documentaries about the attack drew millions of viewers dissecting every moment, debating whether such animals could ever be managed in human spaces. Dave's story became part of the curriculum in wildlife management programs across the country, a cautionary tale about hubris risk and the price of ignoring warnings. The lagoon where he died, once a hidden gem for guides who wanted to wow their guests, was permanently closed to tourism. It is now a memorial wildlife preserve in his honor, a place where no boat engine disturbs the still water. 5 years later, the Everglades have returned to their natural balance, minus the saltwater crocodiles that never should have been there. Tour operators follow strict safety protocols, and multiple warning systems now ensure that guides are immediately informed of any dangerous wildlife in their zones. But for those who knew Dave, and especially for the 22 people who witnessed his final moments, the scars remain. Sarah Carlson now runs a foundation dedicated to wildlife safety education, determined that her husband's death will protect others from similar fates. She often stands at the memorial near the marina where his tours once began, a polished stone set into the dock overlooking the water Dave loved. He loved the Everglades more than anything, she says softly. He would want his death to mean something to protect people from the same kind of tragedy. The plaque is simple. Dave Carlson, he showed us the wonder of the wild and reminded us that nature demands our respect. Below that, in smaller letters, are the words Sarah insisted on: listen to those who know the wilderness. Their warnings might save your life. Tourists still come drawn by the same wild beauty that captivated Dave. They take photographs, ride the airboats, and gaze into waters that seem calm but hide unseen worlds. And for some, the story of Dave Carlson is part of the experience, a quiet reminder whispered by guides who remember him. Because in the end, the swamp Dave loved claimed him. His greatest lesson was not about crocodiles or conservation, nor even about government mismanagement. It was about the razor-thin line between confidence and overconfidence, between respect and complacency, and about what happens when that line is crossed in a place where nature's rules are absolute, unforgiving, and final. Dave Carlson's story is a haunting reminder that in the wild, respect alone isn't always enough to keep you safe. Nature doesn't follow our rules, and sometimes one mistake is all it takes. If this story left you shaken, share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had a close encounter with wildlife? We'd love to hear your story. And if you want more real-life accounts of nature's most dangerous moments, make sure you like this video, subscribe to True Animal Terrors, and ring the bell so you never miss an episode. Stay alert, stay safe, and remember, in the wild, the line between beauty and danger is razor thin.